Oh, hello everybody again.
Greetings.
Dave, Judith, Senior Pastors update from Horizon Church
Yes.
on a sunny morning.
Yeah, it's
Don't know how long it'll last.
Is it the 24th today?
I
23rd?
forget.
I don't know. It's Wednesday.
It's a year and a day after the first lockdown.
Indeed.
And would you believe we have been doing, with a little bit of a break, I think, when we're on holiday, I don't know. We've been doing these Senior Pastors updates for a year.
A year.
Wow. Okay, so today's Senior Pastor update is called God Hears Us,
He hears us.
or God Hears You. And the thought struck us from what said in Psalm 66. I'm just going to pull out two verses about when God hears us, okay? First verse is Psalm 66, verse 14. I will give you what I said I would when I was in trouble. That's the psalmist speaking. Verse 14, I will give you what I said I would when I was in trouble. Compared to verse 19, but God has indeed heard me. He has listened to my prayer.
Yeah.
Now, we hope God hears us. We believe God hears us. And when we pray, we know he hears us, right?
Yes.
And probably we get a little bit cross, frustrated, annoyed, I don't know, when we think he hasn't and he hasn't answered our prayer. Okay, but obviously we know God hears us and he'll always give us the right answer. Sometimes it's not the answer we want. But it's not that we're going to focus on today. It's the first one, which you probably went, ouch, which was, I will give you, said the psalmist, what I said I would when I was in trouble. So God hears us when we call out and ask him and pray to him and we need his help or his guidance or his wisdom or whatever. But he also hears us when we're in trouble and we make that call to him and we say, well, you know, God, if you do this, then I will
I'll do anything.
that. That's what we want to focus on today. God heard us when we said that. He hasn't forgotten that bit. He remembers.
Yeah. In Matthew chapter 8, verse 18, when it says, Jesus saw the crowd around him. He gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. Then a teacher of the law came to him and said, Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go. Jesus replied, Great, come along then. No, he said, Jesus replied, Foxes have holes, birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Might think that's a strange answer, but he was testing this man. You see, there was a crowd, and out from the crowd, we see an individual. Do you know, every one of us are individuals in God's sight. We're more than just members of a crowd. But this man, this teacher of the law, came and made a promise, made a commitment, and then Jesus confronted him with a cost. He said, I will follow you, Jesus, wherever you go. And Jesus said, okay, but you need to know.
This is what it's going to be like.
You need to know. I'm not saying you've got to live in foxholes, mate, but, you know, when you follow me, it's not always as straightforward as you think it might be. I've got nowhere to lay my head. Foxes have holes. And if you're going to follow me, you've got to go where I go and do what I do. You know, promises made can be made in several ways. They can be made emotionally. You know, I think back to times when, you know, you've been in a really powerful meeting and God has spoken to you. And it's good to be emotional. There's nothing wrong with emotion. But when we make promises and when we make decisions, it should be more than just an emotional response. Because emotions are feelings and feelings change. So there's one area that's a bit of a dodgy ground, emotional promises made. But the other thing is out of desperation, when you're in trouble, and it's what Judith mentioned there in that psalm, that we can make a promise or a commitment, and I'll do anything you say, Lord.
If you do this.
If you do this. I don't believe that those two on their own, I think we can be emotional. I think God speaks to us sometimes when we're in trouble, and that's great. But if we're going to make a promise to God and we're going to follow him, we need to make a promise that's made out of sincerity, to count the cost, to follow him, to take up our cross. And you know that rich young ruler that came to Jesus and said, I'm going to follow you. And Jesus said to him, well, first of all, sell everything. And he saw the cost as too high. And I want to put it to you that it's better not to make a promise than to make a promise and not keep it as far as God's concerned. This isn't meant to sound harsh. This is meant to help us be successful in our walk with God. Jude.
And I want to just illustrate that with an account of Hannah, a lady in the Bible called Hannah. You can find her account in 1 Samuel. And she was a lady that didn't have any children, and she desperately wanted a child. And every time they went up to the temple, every year faithfully went up to the temple, and one year she got really, really upset, and she made this vow to God in the temple. She was crying out in anguish because she wanted a child. Hannah was in deep anguish, crying bitterly as she prayed to the Lord, and she made this vow, this promise. O Lord Almighty, if you will look down upon my sorrow and answer my prayer and give me a son, then I will give him back to you. He will be yours for his entire lifetime, and as a sign that he has been dedicated to the Lord, his hair will never be cut. Well, the priest saw her doing all of this and actually thought she was drunk because she was that kind of in anguish and talking to herself and calling out to God. He kind of said, Madam, you shouldn't be drunk in the house of the Lord, get out. And she explained what had happened. He goes, oh, then in that case, verse 17 said Eli, cheer up, may the Lord of Israel grant the request you have asked him. And she went home, and things took a natural course, and it says in the Bible, and in due time she gave birth to a son, and she named him Samuel. Which means, for she said, I asked the Lord for him. So the Lord heard her asking. He heard her and he gave her what she wanted. But her asking was also linked with a promise. If you will give me a son, God, then I will give him back to you and dedicate him my whole life to you. So the next year, after she'd given birth to Samuel, her husband Elkanah and his other wife, because they had several wives in those days, let's not go there on this podcast, and their children went up for their annual trip to offer a sacrifice to the Lord. But, in verse 22, Hannah did not go. She told her husband, wait until the baby is weaned, then I will take him to the tabernacle and leave him there with the Lord permanently. Oh, is she or isn't she going to fulfill her promise? Is she finding it difficult? Well, her husband said this, whatever you think best, dear. I put the dear bit in, but it says, whatever you think is best, he said. Stay here for now, and get this, and may the Lord help you keep your promise. So she did stay at home and nursed the baby there. So she did stay. Now, verse 24 says, when the child was weaned, that means he could eat solid food, he could walk, he could talk, he could, it's not like when he was 18 months old or something ridiculous. It was a bit older. Hannah took him to the temple and they offered the sacrifices for him that they were supposed to under the law. And then she said to the Eli, the person in the temple there, the guy that thought she was drunk, remember? Sir, do you remember me? Hannah asked. I am the woman who stood here several years ago, clue, several years ago, as in, weaned, the child is now, in case you're going to ring Childline or something to say, hang on, Hannah left a child 18 months old without his mother. No, this now is a young boy, right? Several years ago, praying to the Lord, I asked the Lord to give me this child, and he has given me my request. Now I am giving him to the Lord, and he will belong to the Lord his whole life, and they worship the Lord together. And Samuel ended up being God's man for the hour to lead the whole children of Israel, because Eli's sons were corrupt and it was in a mess, and God needed someone who could lead with integrity and honesty, and Samuel was that man.
Absolutely.
So God granted Hannah her request, and she had a son, right? And you think, well, that's all right, God, that's great, you did that. But Hannah gave him back So with the promise, if you give me a son, I'll give him back. And she did. And you think, well, yeah, but that didn't really fulfill. You don't just want a baby to, oh, I've had a baby, tick, give him away. You know, all mothers that are listening to this will go, how on earth did she manage to do that? But get this, right? In chapter 2, it said, and the Lord gave Hannah 3 sons and 2 daughters. And meanwhile, Samuel grew up in the presence of the Lord. She'd put Samuel in the best place to be closest to God, to be used by God.
Yeah.
And God heard not just her prayer for one son, he heard the cry of her heart to be a mother, permanent mother, because she saw him once a year when she went to the temple, Samuel that is, but a permanent mother, day-to-day mother. And he gave her 5 children to keep for the one child that she gave back to God, who ended up saving a whole nation.
He became mighty. What an
He did.
investment.
Yeah, so there's a promise that she kind of, I don't know whether she made it in anguish or emotion or whatever, but the lady followed through, and because she followed through, the nation was saved, and she had 5 more children.
Brilliant. You see, she made a promise to God. She was emotional. She was desperate.
Yeah.
But she made a promise to God that was sincere, and she meant it, and she fulfilled it, and she followed it through. When she was crying in that temple and in anguish, she made a promise, but she followed it through. And as I mentioned earlier, Jesus said, take up your cross and follow me. And where it says take up your cross, it's talking about your commitment and your burden and that you're carrying for God in your life. In other words, you're taking up what he puts upon your shoulders and follow me. And do you know that there's a permanence in that?
Yeah.
If it means anything, it means everything.
True. That's a good one.
Yeah,
Say
it's not
that
bad.
again.
If it means anything, it means everything.
I like it.
Yeah. And the problem is this, that we live in a culture where it's almost like a throwaway culture.
Mm-hmm.
If something breaks, you throw it away. If something doesn't work, you give it up. That could be a relationship. That can be a commitment. It can be a promise. If it doesn't feel good, we just... And one of the things I like about the Queen has always been there. I'm sure she's going to live forever and ever. But she committed herself to duty.
Yeah.
Right at the beginning of her reign. And bless her heart, whatever you think of royalty and the royal family and the rest of it, the monarchy, she has been faithful to the promise that she made. She has. And there is something that I value in people when they commit to something and they do it and they mean it. And there's a culture of being frightened of commitment in these days in which we live. And I think the enemy can get hold of that and spoil the good things God wants to do in us. As we finish, there's a man in the Bible who probably most of you have never heard of. His name's Demas. And he's mentioned in 3 places. In Colossians 4:14, it speaks about him as one of the fellow workers with Paul out in the ministry and missionary journey, who sends his greetings.
With
Demas,
Paul. I mean, that is some missionary to be with.
In Philemon, which is that tiny little book in the Bible, about 1 chapter in the New Testament, in verse 24, hasn't even got a chapter, it's just verse 24, he's called a fellow worker with Paul.
Right.
But there's a sad, sad verse in 2 Timothy, and it says that Demas has forsaken us because he's loved this present world. The man who was a fellow worker, a man who was a fellow missionary, a man who stood alongside Paul, deserted him. Perhaps he made promises. Mm-hmm. I don't know about that man that came and heard about the foxholes. It doesn't say whether he followed him or not. If he did, I hope he meant it. Mm-hmm. And the thing I like about Paul is, at the end of his life, he says, I've finished the course.
Yeah, finish the race.
I've done what you've called me to do.
Yeah, job done.
Let's not be afraid of commitment. In fact, I think we should fear, not in a kind of afraidness, but we should be very concerned about making promises that we can't keep, because if following Jesus is worth anything, it's worth
Everything.
everything. It is.
So God hears us.
He hears
our
us.
prayers, but he also hears what we promise.
We promise, yeah.
So it's, and maybe ask God to remind you, because God has not forgotten.
Yeah.
And he's a gentleman and he won't force you. But it might be a good idea to ask him, is there anything, God, I've promised you that I've actually forgotten myself? And maybe you want to call that in?
And the truth is, doing what God calls us to do and what he wants us to do is the best thing.
Yeah.
It's the most fulfilling.
Well, we saw that in Hannah.
Yeah. Her investment was powerful.
Yeah. I mean,
it was costly, but it was powerful.
Yeah.
Just one thought comes to mind. Do you remember checks? When you write checks out? Do you remember those things? I don't have money now, do you? Just touch a pad with a card. I haven't seen a £5 note in months. Anyway, but checks, they lasted 6 months. So you could write a cheque on the 1st of January and forget about it. So you write a cheque for £100. You paid it, but the person you give it to hasn't presented it in the bank yet. So you think, if you forget about that cheque, you think you're £100 better off than you really are.
5 months
then
later,
5 months later, the so-and-so puts it in the bank and you're boom, your
whoa, where's that
100 quid's
100 quid
gone.
go?
Where did that go? Yeah, but you put your signature to that.
Yeah.
And that promise to pay that £100 was still good 5
Yeah.
months afterwards.
Yeah.
Hey, the promises we make are still good, by God's grace. So I hope that hasn't ruined your day.
But obviously the flip side of that coin, money, is that God has made promises to us,
Yeah,
and he will
absolutely. He's
never,
faithful.
ever break those. So you can remind God of your promise. We're just saying, sometimes he might come back to you and say, yeah, I'm going to do that. But actually, do you remember saying that to me? So let's see what we promise God.
Yeah.
Do we need to follow through? That's just the question out there.
Yeah.
God hears us, and he hasn't forgotten. Is there
No.
anything we need to follow through that we've promised God that we would do? And even just bring it right down to present day. Anything you've learnt in lockdown, you said to yourself, do you know, during lockdown, I've learnt this, and I am going to continue doing this because it's good for me. They're little promises to yourself and for future life that you do need to kind of make sure you follow through, because a promise without following through is just a bunch of words, and they're no good to anyone unless they actually mean something in action. So there you go.
All right.
God hears us, good and bad. Well, not bad, but do you know what I mean? Might cost us a bit. So we're coming now on to just some practical stuff for you Horizoners. That was coined on Sunday in the comments. So Horizoners. Here we go. A good bit of news. Oh, Yvonne has had a little boy called Oliver Leonard. Oh, bless him. He was
Oliver Leonard. That's a strong name, isn't
in
it?
old money. It's just over £6. Just over £6. So that's a good
No,
weight.
in proper weights, it's £6.
Okay. And we remember we praying because they knew that he had a hair lip, and they didn't know how bad, whether it would be his gum and the roof of his mouth.
Yeah.
The great news is it's only his lip.
We
Thank
specifically
the
prayed
Lord.
on Sunday that it would not be a
His
cleft
palate,
palate.
yeah.
Yes.
So he's feeding well. He's able to feed, so that's amazing.
And they
so
can fix that.
congratulations,
Yeah, they can fix
Yvonne,
that.
and welcome, Oliver,
Yeah.
to the Horizon. You are officially a Horizoner. Bless him. The latest arrival. Okay, clocks. Do you want to talk about clocks?
Clocks.
TikTok.
Clocks. It's this Sunday. It's an hour earlier. So what you need to do, spring, you put your clocks forward 1 hour Saturday night, and so otherwise you'll be an hour adrift.
An hour late for church.
An hour late for church, which
Ooh.
isn't quite so much
You can
of an
catch up,
issue
yeah.
while we're doing it online, but it's nice for you to join in
Live.
but anyway, yeah.
Okay, so that's good. The other thing is we are doing church online still, and we live stream from church on Sunday. Didn't the set look awesome? I mean, Lee did such a good job. I'm not allowed to say his
Not
name.
say
am I?
that, no,
But anyway, Zed, if you were on before. Lee's done a great job. And the colour coordination of those backdrops and those chairs, awesome. But then I looked at it and I thought, you know what will make it just a bit nicer if we had some green plants. So then I thought, actually, the temperature, anyway, whatever. So either artificial green plants, and they take no keeping, do they? I've actually put out a thing on FreeCycle, and I've got a couple of people locally that said, "Oh, you can have this and that and the other." So I followed it. Yeah, I've done that. I followed it up. If you've got any artificial plants that you would like to donate while we're live streaming, or if you're really brave and you've got a really nice, one of those nice bushy tree things that's living that you don't mind if we kill.
No,
I'm not sure whether we're
not going to kill it.
Well,
we're going to put you in charge of looking after it.
Yeah, you're going to have to come to church and look after it, okay? You can be the plant. We're going to have a horizon plant monitor. But anyway, if you've got either an artificial one that you think will look nice on the set, then that would be great. Or if you're going to trust us with a real live one, which you're going to look careful or whatever, that will be fantastic. So let us know, please. Where this is a plant call out, okay? Because I went and had a look in
A
yes,
shop.
I was going to say its name, but I'm not going to say it. Anyway,
A DIY
a
store.
DIY store, and the kind of size one I was looking about, but 30, 40, 50 quid for a live one. I thought, wow, with all the different change in temperature in that church, it's just going to die within whatever. So anyway, we're sending out an appeal for plants. And
we could do some advice from green-fingered people, basically.
We're going to live stream again from church this Sunday, just to again check out the tech to make sure we've got everything sorted out. Hopefully it might look a bit greener on there as well. With the hope and trust that on Easter Sunday we are going to allow 30 people in the building, ticketed, to have our Easter Sunday service. Woo, in the building.
Plus
still live streaming, so you won't miss out at all. But keep your eye on the emails as they come out, and you'll get the link to the tickets.
It was a stroke of genius not having our first Sunday back the week that the clocks changes.
Yeah, it was. So we're easing ourselves in. So that's it. Hope that's been helpful and useful for you today. Go and talk to God about the stuff that you said to him, promised him. And remember your clocks on Saturday evening.
Yeah. Have a great week.
Have a good week.
God bless all.
Bye.
See you soon. Bye-bye.